Brooklyn Nets guard Kyrie Irving has missed the past few games because of an injury the team is calling shoulder impingement. He's reportedly having pain so severe in his shoulder that there's no way he can make it through a game, and the exact duration of how long he's going to be out seems a little bit up in the air. Welcome back everyone to your number one source for learning about everything related to sports injuries and sports medicine news. In today's video, I'm going to teach you guys about what in the world shoulder impingement is and how it relates here to Kyrie Irving. I'll give you a basic overview of the important anatomy in the shoulder as it relates to impingement, and then we'll talk about the specific types of impingement that Kyrie could be dealing with. We'll finally finish up by talking about how these conditions are treated and what this could mean for the rest of Kyrie's season. Make sure and go subscribe if you like this type of content and want to stay up to date with my future videos, and let's get started. Impingement sounds a lot like pinching, and so as you might have guessed, shoulder impingement involves essentially the pinching of different structures in the shoulder that can cause pain. The muscle we're going to talk about here is the one that Paul George actually had a partial tear of and required surgery. That one was the supraspinatus, and it's important because it's the muscle that sits right in that area where we get shoulder impingement. The clavicle extends out to the shoulder and forms your AC joint along with a part of the scapula called the acromion. We then of course need to be able to recognize the humerus, which is the arm bone, and the socket of the shoulder joint, which is called the glenoid. The space below the acromion can be thought of as the subacromial space, and this is one of the regions that's implicated in shoulder impingement. There's some really important structures that go through this space, namely one of the rotator cuff muscles called the supraspinatus. The supraspinatus muscle helps to raise our arm up in this plane, and it runs underneath that subacromial space and inserts on the outer portion of the arm bone up by the shoulder. The biceps tendon also runs through that space, and then sitting on top of that supraspinatus muscle, you have something called a bursa, which is sort of a lubricating kind of potential space that helps provide a reduction in some of the friction between the bone of the acromion and the muscle. The last important structure to remember here is the labrum, which is this sort of rim of cartilage that goes around the glenoid to provide some additional stability and space to that shoulder joint. If we go super detailed, we could describe 4 different types of shoulder impingement. All of them involve some degree of these soft tissues being pinched between potential spaces in the shoulder, which cause pain and impair our function. Now, internal impingement typically occurs in throwing athletes. So think of a baseball pitcher or a football quarterback. And in this type of impingement, you basically have pinching between the underside of that supraspinatus muscle and the labrum. Whenever a throwing athlete brings their arm back into this position we call extreme external rotation, you can get some pinching in the backside of the shoulder that can cause pain and can affect the labrum. That's a whole other topic for a different video, and so in this one I want to focus on the first two, and that is primary and secondary impingement. Think back to our anatomy picture here, and particularly this area of the subacromial space. Whenever we have primary or secondary shoulder impingement, basically, this subacromial space is becoming pinched or is becoming narrowed. There's multiple ways that this can happen, and that's sort of what gives us this primary and secondary types of impingement. Whenever an athlete raises their arm to the side or raises their arm up over their head, the way that that humerus rotates up into the shoulder joint causes that subacromial space to become narrow and to potentially pinch those structures beneath it. This is why it's particularly hard for a basketball player who's having their shooting side affected, because every time Kyrie is going to be shooting or is going to be doing anything outstretched from his body, the anatomical position causes that space in his shoulder to become narrowed, causing those structures to become pinched and then painful. Primary shoulder impingement happens whenever there's some anatomical deformity of this space, typically because of the shape of the acromion, that naturally causes that space to be smaller. If we look at this cross section here, we can see the acromion here on top, and the supraspinatus muscle is running right in this intersection. As you can tell, depending on how the acromion is shaped, there's going to be less room in this space for whenever our arm moves. So some people are basically born with this anatomical variation that predisposes them to this primary type of impingement. Now, secondary impingement occurs whenever there's some dysfunction in the stability of the shoulder joint that causes that space to become narrowed and pinched. This is where it's especially important to understand our rotator cuff muscles, because the rotator cuff muscles are helping to sort of maintain that space. Some of these rotator cuff muscles are actually pulling the humerus down, and so by pulling the humerus down, you pull it apart from the acromion and you increase that space. If you have any weakness or tearing or damage to the rotator cuffs, then you don't have that ability to protect that space, and your humerus can basically move upward, closer to the acromion, narrowing that potential space. Now, just because Kyrie has shoulder impingement doesn't mean that he has to have a rotator cuff tear. We can see shoulder impingement without a rotator cuff tear, but it's definitely part of the spectrum of when we can see rotator cuff damage. There's some evidence that the damage occurs within the rotator cuff muscle itself, which then causes that space to become narrow, leading to the impingement. And then there's some other research that tells us that maybe it's because of the compression and wear and shear stress on the muscle and tendon that then cause you to develop rotator cuff problems. So oftentimes there's some involvement with the rotator cuff muscle, but it doesn't necessarily 100% imply that he has a rotator cuff tear. But that's definitely one of the long-term risks here, is that rotator cuff tears and impingement can go hand in hand and lead to potential further needs like surgery. So what is the medical team going to do here to try to help get Kyrie through this episode of shoulder impingement and keep him healthy going forward the rest of the season? Well, you might have seen the pictures where they've tried things like taping, where they've put some tape over that area. It's trying to basically keep that space spread apart a little bit to try to minimize the impingement. The main thing they're doing right away though is avoiding the activities that provoke his pain. You have to remove that irritation on those structures in that shoulder space. And so you limit your shooting, you limit those activities that are causing pain. Sometimes this involves taking anti-inflammatory medications, and sometimes it even involves using a steroid injection to try to help calm down any inflammation or pain within that area. But the big long-term thing that really makes or break the recovery here is strengthening and training the biomechanics around the shoulder. You have to strengthen the rotator cuff muscles so that it can properly protect and allow for good movement of that arm, so that you're not predisposing yourself to that impingement. Also, you can have poor mobility of your shoulder blade. And so whenever your shoulder blade is moving through your shot motion or you're passing, you're predisposing your shoulder to getting that impingement position. So for Kyrie, it's all about rehab, rehab, rehab. You've got to strengthen those stabilizers in the shoulder. You've got to make sure you've got good scapular and shoulder biomechanics so that you don't put your shoulder in that position where you're going to have impingement. If you don't take the time off and really let this calm down, you're just going to have repetitive impingement after impingement after impingement that can then lead you to a higher risk of having something like a rotator cuff tear that's going to be a much longer absence and potentially require surgery. Something had to have happened to stimulate this impingement and the pain, whether it was the primary type of impingement where he's got some anatomical deformity, or it was some sort of strain or involvement of the rotator cuff that caused irritation in that space that then led to the impingement symptoms. The medical team needs to make sure they get at that root cause of the impingement, because even if his pain resolves in the short term, he's going to be at risk of this going forward throughout the rest of the season. That's it for the video though, everybody. Thank you as always for watching. Let me know any questions or comments you have below, and hopefully you guys enjoyed learning something here about shoulder impingement, particularly related to Kyrie Irving. We'll see you in the next video.